Doing ghostly paranormal things was not my initial career path. I was actually started out as a research scientist for a medical diagnostics company, and once the lab closed, I thought, I've always wanted to write, maybe I'll start writing. And as you can see, that's some of what I've been doing the last 30 years. And one of the things that came up was hauntings, which this area, you may be aware, is quite abundant in hauntings. And I personally go to haunted locations and try to do things with historical research, scientific research, interviewing people. There's a lot to it. You don't just go and ask questions. There's a lot to it. And I hope there are many more exciting adventures in my future with that. But one of the subsets of my research has been haunted objects. You think if we turn out the lights, it might show the screen up a little better? Let's try that. Because that's good, thank you. So many their stories began with, there was nothing wrong in my house till I purchased such and such, or I inherited such and such, and I said, oh, I see a pattern developing here. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And before I do that, somewhat related, I have a murder podcast with a friend of mine who's a police sergeant. It's on HudsonRiverRadio.com. We also do a UFO podcast. So if you're interested in other strange things I do, please check out HudsonRiverRadio.com. So, very early on, when I started doing this about 25 years ago, I don't know who said it, but I remember they said that a ghost can attach itself to a person, a place, or a thing. We're most familiar with the place part. You know, the spooky house on the other side of the railroad tracks, the cemetery, something like that. We generally don't think of ghosts moving around from site to site so much, unless they're somehow attached to a person. It's rare, but I've had some really spooky cases about that, where wherever these people go, these things follow. Yeah, just try sleeping when you know about that. And then what we're speaking about tonight is the thing part. So, I believe, yeah, this is kind of redundant, isn't it? I think all dolls are creepy, but let me show you the mother of all creepy dolls. This is a case that's in Summit, New Jersey, so not too far from here. This house was a boarding house for local farmhands, built in the 1840s. Unfortunately, nobody really got a good night's sleep there, because even back then, there were footsteps, there were apparitions in this newly built home, and lots of stories of these poor farmhands after a weary day trying to get some sleep and ending up running out in the middle of the night. Well, fast forward to the 1960s, the Wershing family purchased this. And the poor kids, in the middle of the night, would often, out of their second-story windows, jump down onto the roof of a porch, shimmy down a pole, and run to the neighbor's house because they were so scared. Footsteps, footsteps are bad enough, but when they go up the side of a wall and over your head, full-bodied apparitions, balls of light, all kinds of things. A very interesting way these people grew up. But this is one of the creepiest things there. This is a doll that was dressed, made up as a prize for the Wershing's granddaughter. She was named Queen of the Sussex County Fair when she was a little girl. So they made this doll to look like her. It was given as a prize. It sat on this table in the Wershing's parlor for 10 years. The girl grew up. She was in college in New Mexico. And Mrs. Wershing got a call one day saying, your granddaughter is okay, but there's been an accident. So she thought, oh, that's strange. She was just thinking of her granddaughter because that morning she found the doll lying on the floor. It hadn't moved in 10 years. She just picked it up, put it back, and she said, well, what happened? Well, they were removing asbestos from one of the buildings. And when you do that, you need to keep the building under negative pressure so the fibers don't escape. They did not put a warning sign on the door. So as she opened the heavy metal door, the negative pressure slammed it shut and severed her index finger. So Mrs. Wershing said, wait a minute. She went and looked at the doll. Can you see what's missing here? Was I steering you wrong when I said creepy doll? She said she got on her hands and knees. She searched for hours. She never found that finger. And she's not quite sure what happened first. You know, New Mexico, time difference. She got an approximation. Did the doll fall and break its finger, then the accident occurred? Which I'd really not like to think of that. Or it's not much better vice versa, that the accident occurred to her and then the doll fell and the finger is missing. So kind of suggested wrapping it in bubble wrap, give it an air hole, and just put this doll in a closet. So we don't want to suffocate the granddaughter. Mr. Wershing did not make things any better in this house because he thought of himself as something of an Indiana Jones. So he would go to local Indian burial grounds, dig up the artifacts and bones, and he had a skull displayed on their dining room table. He had an entire, I saw his room filled with, you know, first of all, that's highly illegal. Second of all, it's highly immoral. And one day after he brought the contents of a grave into the house, he took off on a business trip. He was an oil executive. And so poor Mrs. Wershing is all alone because her kids had grown up and moved out as soon as they could. And she is in her bedroom that night. The room turns icy, icy cold, and she feels something laying up against her in bed, the whole length of her bed, and something starts scratching her. She said she could feel the hot breath in her ear. She jumps up, runs out of the room. Obviously she doesn't sleep anymore. That night she said, I'm not going back in that bedroom. So she went into her daughter's bedroom. And this picture doesn't do it justice, but the most frightening thing in the Wershing house is this wallpaper. Where it's that is shiny aluminum foil type 60s. Wow. Anyway, she's sleeping in her daughter's room. She said, okay, I'll be safe in here. It doesn't know I'm in here. Well, once again, middle of the night, she wakes up, the room is icy, icy cold. She feels this thing up against her again, this scratching claws. She jumps up. As she's running out, she has the courage to turn around and look on the bed to see if she sees anything. She doesn't see anything, but a very deep voice said, "Found you." So, how would you have liked to have been Mr. Wershing when he got home that day? You get every phone, every artifact, you get it all out of the house. He did, and even with that, they actually had to call in an exorcist for this particular case. So if anybody wants to buy a creepy doll, you just, I'll get you in touch with the Wershings. Okay, here's another creepy doll. I didn't think this was so bad. Does anybody know, it's gone now, but Flo Jean's restaurant?
Yeah.
It was, okay, Port Jervis there for decades. It was a toll house, became a speakeasy, and then became a very popular restaurant for generations. And the woman who owned the place had this big doll collection. And when we went to investigate a couple of times, Mike and I, and he was totally freaked out by this big boy doll there. Every time he went near it, his skin just crawled. He tried taking photos of it. His camera would not work near the boy doll. I was able to take pictures. We tried switching cameras, everything. Whatever he was holding, he could not take a picture of this thing. If you're familiar with EMF meters, they measure electromagnetic fields. There was a very strong electromagnetic field around this boy doll. Well, as I mentioned, the restaurant's not there anymore. Unfortunately, this is some photos of it being demolished. I didn't find out until a week later that the doll collection was up for auction. I would have gone, I would have paid anything to get that boy doll, because my plan was to stand it on Mike's porch, ring the doorbell. I have a feeling that doll would have gotten ventilated, if you know what I mean. Oh well, someday. Another thing you should not bring home. We're going to start a list of things not to bring home. These are cemetery gates. This woman in Wappingers Falls was at a local rural cemetery, and back leaning against the maintenance shed was this pair of wrought iron gates, and she left a little note on them. If you're going to throw these out, I want them. I want to put them at the end of my driveway. So she did, and that very night she's asleep in her house upstairs, and she hears very heavy footsteps, like boots, a man in boots clomping up the stairs, and she's like, oh my God, he's gonna kill me. She's sitting in terror, waiting for the door to open. The door doesn't open, but something grabs her by the back of the neck and starts like whipping her back and forth on the bed. She doesn't know how long this went on. Suddenly it's gone. She of course jumps up, checks that all the doors and windows are locked. There's no way anybody could have gotten in there. So the next morning she's telling a friend, and the friend's thinking, okay, you know, just a bad dream, until she lifted up this woman's hair and there were these big red scratches down the back of her neck. So what would you do? Get rid of the gates? Yes, I'd be out there with a sledgehammer the next day. No, she was afraid that whatever she brought to the house with the gates would be trapped there. But this is a show I did probably 10 or 15 years ago. You can see I'm holding an EMF meter between the gates. There was a very strong field right between the gates. It diminished the farther away you got. Very strange. No reason for these gates to be, you know, generating some sort of electromagnetic field. And they came to this house because they started having ghosts in the garage, in the yard, upstairs, downstairs, basement of the house, everywhere. It became, you know, I called it the Grand Central Station. And to my knowledge, I drove by a year ago, the gates are still there. I know she was trying to sell the house for a while. I'll give you her information. So what else don't we do? This is Laurel Grove Cemetery in Port Jervis, known for its apparition of a woman floating through the cemetery, all kinds of paranormal activity. And we were there on an investigation one night, and my husband's foot kicked something, and he picks it up. This is a casket handle. See the hole beneath, see right here? A very productive groundhog has a nice nest down here, and what the groundhogs do is throw out hard bits of metal and bone. Usually they just try to toss the bones back in if the caretakers find it, or dig another hole. But please, please do not bring casket handles home. As I said, Laurel Grove is exceedingly haunted in itself. Now, well, hello, there we go. This is innocuous enough, an old fedora. Lots of people buy vintage clothing, you know, used clothing, things like that. What could be wrong? Well, a couple bought an old fedora similar to this at a flea market antique store, and they thought, oh, this will be a nice decorative piece. We'll put it next to this wingback chair in the guest room. You know, it's an old style home. So they put it there. The next day, the woman's walking by the room, and there in the chair is an old man wearing the fedora. And, you know, she ran, and by the time she got her husband, they came back. He was gone, but they grabbed the fedora, ran outside, and threw it in the garbage. And so you just never know. You just never know where these objects have come from. All right, we're going to go upstate a bit. Canfield Casino in Saratoga Springs. Everybody been to Saratoga Springs? Beautiful, beautiful area. Wealthy people from around the country in the 1800s came there they thought the spring water had very healing effect. So a lot of money was in Saratoga Springs. Well, we need to relieve the pressure of these big bankrolls, so let's open up a casino, which opened in 1894. And in 1894, late 1890s, if the average person made $500 per year, you were comfortable, you were doing pretty well. Any given night at the Canfield Casino, men were betting hundreds of thousands of dollars on a single hand of poker or a single spin of the roulette wheel. That's the kind of money that went through there. Today it's a historical society, but the police have been called on numerous occasions because they see lights going on and off, curtains raising and lowering. And one thing very odd they see is a beautiful woman, blonde, in a blue Victorian dress. Now, casinos were strictly for the men back then. You would never see a woman coming into this casino. So how did she get there? Well, once it became a historical museum, they were taking donations, and the belongings of a local historical figure, this woman, who happened to be blonde, who happened to have this beautiful blue dress that was brought in as part of the collection, seemed to spark this activity. So is she connected to the dress? Is she connected to all the other belongings? Who knows, but we think that's why she is there. Then there's this authentic old roulette table that every year several people will come down to the front desk and say, that is the greatest reenactor you have portraying the desperate gambler standing next to the roulette wheel. People will see this man looking as though he lost his last nickel, which he probably did, and he's spending all eternity trying to get that back. So you can certainly see, if you've ever been to a casino, yes, I have, the desperation on people, the lives that can be ruined, and tied to, if you can imagine, if you lost your family fortune on this wheel, and a lot of people committed suicide as a result of losing all their money, these objects can be very powerfully charged. Okay, haunted paintings. Most people have an old painting or two. Maybe they inherited it, or you saw it at a flea market. Again, you never know what could be connected to them. This was the Castle Tavern in Greenwood Lake. I'm not sure, I know it's different owners. Is it still in operation?
Yes.
Okay, is it still called the Castle Tavern?
It's a different name.
Different name, okay. But you can see why it's called the Castle Tavern, or it was at the time. Now there's a pair of paintings there of these two ladies. And the story was You're never supposed to put the paintings next to one another. They can hang in the same room, but they have to be on opposite walls. Well, apparently a construction worker who was doing some renovations didn't get the paranormal memo, and he took them down. I spoke to this man. He took the paintings down, put them side by this row of windows, and he said one by one the windows shattered. He said they just burst. And somebody came in, "What are you doing? Separate the paintings." I don't know how much longer he worked there after that. So what is it about two innocuous paintings? Well, I believe the one on the left was the picture of, was a portrait painted of the owner's wife. Does anybody want to guess what the one on the right? Oh, we have a very astute crowd this early in the morning. His mistress, yes. For those of you saying, what? Yes. So there was a little animosity, as you can imagine, because the wife, the mistress was a waitress there. And you see a little saucy there, probably flaunted the whole thing. So the wife devised a plan to kill the mistress and the husband. When they were all there, she set fire to the place. Backfired just a bit. The husband rescued the mistress. They got out all right, and the wife died in the fire. So I have interviewed people who didn't know about this story, and they see figures moving around all the time. And one woman said that she saw what looked like the figure of a person in flames running by this one doorway. So I think we can tie that all together. So just be careful when you're, especially buying a pair of paintings. Okay, sometimes the artist is as ghostly as his painting. And this is a case that was up near Ellenville. This man is Jim Lee. He was known as Mr. Jimmy. He wrote a very popular best-selling cookbook in the 60s called Jim Lee's Chinese Cooking. You might have it on your shelf at home. It was a huge hit. You can still buy it to this day. Well, Jim Lee had a summer home up in Ellenville, and I spoke to the new owners of the home. This was decades ago that he had this, and she said that soon after she moved in, friends would call her up and say, you know, I thought you were at work today. She says, yeah, I worked all day. Well, then who's that Chinese guy on your porch? And they said, what are you talking about? Yeah, we see him all the time. He's hanging out on this little Chinese guy. And come to find out, that was their summer home. So he is a ghost at this place. So a lot of other things go on at this house. So we went to investigate. Mike, the big strong cop, Barbara, who's a very talented psychic, and I. And you know, this wasn't our first rodeo. I've done hundreds of hauntings. So we're investigating the place, and the homeowner says, I have one of Mr. Lee's paintings. I was like, well, just out of curiosity, I'd like to see it. She's like, we keep it in the attic. I'm like, well, why would you keep it in the attic? She said, it creeps the hell out of us. She said, we can't stand looking at it. There's something wrong with it. And we're like, okay. I said, would you mind? You know, we're here. Could you please bring the painting out of the attic? So she does. She brings it down. She turns it around. This is the painting. And we all just went, literally, all three of us at once stepped back, and I think my words were, oh, there's something very wrong here. And all three of us, now this was probably painted in the 60s, maybe the early 70s. So this was a young boy. Chances are he was still alive. All three of us at once said, he's dead, and he did not die in a normal manner. Come to find out, we tracked down Mr. Lee's widow, who was very old at this point, and the homeowner said, Daisy, she said to this woman, do you have any idea who this little boy is that your husband painted? She said, oh, absolutely. He was the son of a neighbor, and a few years after this, several years after this, he committed suicide by riding his bicycle over a cliff. So we very much are convinced he is attached to the painting. So it's one thing to talk about these haunted objects. Give me a moment. Yes. Uh-oh. I was asked to loan this to a museum up in Pine Bush a couple of years ago, and they were doing some renovations, and there was a big, strong construction worker, you know, real outdoors guy. He could not stay in the same room with this thing. It terrified him. I've done this several times, and people will move their seat to get away from him. A couple of weeks ago, I spoke to a group of seniors in Rockland, there was at least 100 people in the audience, and I said, does anybody feel anything from this painting? Everybody's like, and then when the lecture was open, dozens of people came up to me and said, oh my God, that painting. I was like, you chicken, you wouldn't say anything. So I'm not even going to ask you if you feel anything from it. Some people say, it's nothing, he looks like Macaulay Culkin from Home Alone. But a lot of people, it just makes their skin crawl. I do not keep this in my house. I just wanted to borrow it for the museum, and Daisy said, take it. You know, she was keeping it in an old trailer in the back of the property. She goes, I never want to see it again, whatever you want to do with it. So we keep it in our shed. I affectionately call him the creepy boy. But if you notice in the bottom right, that dragon snake thing, that was Mr. Lee's signature. So we absolutely know he did this painting. So enjoy as I continue. If anybody do you want me to move it? Do you want me to move it over there? Okay. Okay, I will. Do you guys mind over there? No. Okay. Yeah, you can say that now. All right, so we'll put creepy boy over this side. Okay. No? All right. That's better? Okay. Yeah, no, I mean, seriously, I know. I don't want you to feel uncomfortable at all. Okay. So there was a house in Liberty that I investigated, 15, 20 years ago. They were seeing an elderly lady and a little boy and a little girl. And we got some interesting evidence, and the owner said, we can live with this. It's not so terrible. But then several years later, the homeowner got in touch with me, actually the one woman renting the house. And she said, I don't know what's going on. We can't sleep. The activity is through the roof, running, noises constantly. One of the things they were seeing was an empty wedding gown floating around the living room. That's kind of bizarre. So I said, all right, we'll come up. I went with this psychic, Lisa Ann, and Mike. We went up there. Oh, you know Lisa Ann? Yeah, she's fabulous. So we went up there, and I didn't even tell Lisa Ann where we were going. I don't want to prejudice her at all. It's an old Victorian house. The second we got out of the car, she said, there's an old lady in the attic looking down at us. And we went inside, and she said, I hear the pitter-patter of little feet. And I said, you know, again, you don't say, is it a boy and a girl? I said, you know, what gender? And she said, I think it's a little boy and a little girl. And she said, the old lady regrets never having children of her own, and that she's taking care of this little boy and little girl in death because she never got to do that in life. She said this a couple of times, and that was about all we were getting, and everybody, it was an early morning investigation. People had to get to work, and I said, wait a minute. You know, that my little spidey sense was tingling, and I said, why would this elderly woman who had trouble getting around be way up in this narrow little attic window? So I said, I really want to get up there. And the homeowner's like, do you know how many boxes I have to move? I said, look, we drove all the way up here. Let's do this. So I am literally crawling under rafters full of dust and spiders. It's a very glamorous profession that I have. But I found, you can see some of the rafters and the old insulation down there. I found these items, and among them was this book from 1902. I don't know if you can see the 1902, and Mary Drake, someone who lived there. And this was like just a regular book, but in the blank pages in the back, Mary had kept something of a diary. So it was hard to read up in the dark, dirty attic. So we brought it down into the kitchen. Now remember what Lisa Ann was saying, and we're reading it, and this poor old woman says, I ain't got no one to call me mom. And she went on to allude to the fact that she had been left at the altar. Remember, they were seeing an empty wedding gown, and the theme of being so sad that she never got to have children. So once we read this, the activity stopped, and why it had picked up, because 2 weeks later they lost their lease, and that would have been the last opportunity for us to go back to investigate it. So the clock was ticking, so I think they picked up the activity. Now where this book gets even stranger is a couple of months after moving out. They were now living in Orange County. This was up in Liberty and Sullivan County. And the mother asks, they're driving around, it's a sunny day like today, and the mother says to the daughter, could you get my sunglasses out of the glove compartment? So she reaches into the glove compartment. That book was in the glove compartment. And they absolutely left it there. They didn't want to bring it with them. So how did this book get from that house several months later into there? She's like, do you want it? I said, no, she's thanking you for, you keep the book. But it's just, if you pay attention to these clues, it can really lead you to some amazing things. Okay. Furniture. Everybody's probably bought some sort of an old table or something, again, inherited it. This is not the exact bed, it's an example of a couple who went to an antique dealer and bought a bed very similar to this for, again, a spare bedroom. And after they had it, you know, set up, they kept hearing a little boy coughing in this room. Night after night, this terrible coughing. They'd run in the room, there's nobody there, it would stop. It was really getting on their nerves. They finally went back to the antique dealer and they said, okay, first of all, you are giving us our money back. That is not a given. You're taking this back, so that's a done deal. Now tell us the truth. And apparently the last owners, their little 9-year-old son died of pneumonia in this bed. So very sad, but these people did not need that bed in their home. We're going far afield for a few moments. Guthrie, Oklahoma. Anybody here ever been to Guthrie, Oklahoma? For years, I was promising a free book to anybody in my audience. 15, 20 years later, I have not given away a single book. But this is now the Stone Lion Inn, as you can see, why it's called that. Beautiful big house. The Houghton family built this in the early 1900s. It was one of those land grabs. What just happened? I don't know what just... Did I touch something? Okay. Okay, thank you. The Houghton family had, I believe, 14 children. And when Betty Luker moved into this place in the 1980s, her kids were talking about a little girl who was always bothering them on the top floor in the playroom because she always insisted that toy box was her toy box, and those, you know, that's where her toys were. And one day her little son came down all, well, I'm not going back up there till she leaves because, you know, she's hogging all my toys. And it turns out that one of the Houghton children, a little 7-year-old girl, had gotten very ill, and the nurse gave her the wrong medication, and it killed her. And that was her toy box up there. Well, Betty turned this into a bed and breakfast, and she used to love to bake cookies. And you can see this metal table was the only thing that was left in the house when they bought it. It was in the kitchen, and if you've ever rolled out sugar cookies, you like a nice cold, you know, metal or marble surface to roll out your cookies. So they were having all, in addition to the little girl, they were seeing all kinds of spirits, seeing a man in like a stovepipe hat. Things were happening all the time, and they're like, what went on in this house? So anyway, Betty makes some cookies for one of her sons to bring to school. And the teacher's eating this cookie. Oh, this is delicious. Yeah, my mom makes them on there's this big metal table in the kitchen, and the teacher drops the cookie. She goes, don't you know what that is? This was a funeral home for many years. That's the embalming table. Great place to make your Christmas and holiday cookies. So they rapidly moved the table out into the hallway, and they keep their beer and wine on it, and they now call it their spirits table. So if you're ever out in Guthrie, Oklahoma, please look up the Stone Lion Inn. Here's some other things you don't want in your home. The Patchett House, otherwise known as the Wallkill River School in Montgomery. These are the embalming sinks in the basement. You can see these boards on top here. They would lay the board on top, and so the fluids would run into one of the 3 sinks. We don't need to go into that in any great detail. But the Patchett House has had innumerable hauntings over the years. I've done several ghost tours there, a lot of lectures, numerous investigations, all kinds of activity. Probably a lot of it centered around its days as a funeral home. It was also an inn, you know, a lot of travelers coming and going. But one of our investigations, Mike Barber and I are upstairs on the 2nd floor. We hear this crashing sound. We're the only ones, we're locked into the building. This crashing sound, I describe it as like somebody dragging a couch, picking it up, and throwing it. That's how loud it was. Mike drew his weapon because he was certain somebody had broken in and was just, you know, being violent. We didn't find a single person, searched the entire house room to room, but at the same time we were hearing that noise, something happened in the basement near these sinks. If you're familiar with the trail cameras, hunters will strap them to a tree, and when a deer goes by, it takes a series of photos. So you can see this is one of our EMF meters here. Here's the sinks. This is the door where they used to bring the bodies in. And when we're hearing this crashing sound, something in the basement trips the camera. You can see the time, it was 55 degrees down there. And this is the first photo, something tripped it. This was the second photo, something has a hold of the camera. And that's the third. So this was not a moth, because this is a substantial camera strapped to a heavy tripod. Something grabbed this camera and shook it at that moment. We have tried to reproduce this. We have taken our hands and put it in front of the camera. Now this is infrared. Your skin in infrared looks like bright, bright white, and you can see every ridge of your fingerprints. We tried it with gloves. Clothing looks white. We cannot figure out what this was. So trail cameras are a great way if you have any suspicious activity in your home of setting one of those up. But be careful, because you may not want to see what's going on down there. On a historical note, this is Fort Montgomery. That's the Bear Mountain Bridge in the background. I think this photo illustrates why they put the fort there, a great defensive position on the river. But for years, people have been seeing soldiers in red English uniforms, because I don't know if you're all familiar with the Battle of Fort Montgomery, but quite a few people were killed and seriously wounded there. And on a regular basis, again, people will come into the visitor center and say, again, that's the best you know, patriot reenactor with his frock coat and his weapon. That is so good. And you know, we didn't hire anyone. Sorry, you know. So the soldiers are still seen there, and these are not ghosts. This is the visitor center. But apparently, from what we've been able to determine, the visitor center was placed on where all the bodies were collected after the battle. And on top of that, here it is in the light, if you can see these cabinets all around, the artifacts that the soldiers had on them when they were killed are in this building as well. This was one of my favorite. If you ever go there, check this out. Can you see it says Liberty? This was on a little enameled cuff button that one of the Patriot soldiers was wearing when he was killed. As I said, they see soldiers and figures all the time. One of my favorite stories is a caretaker on a very snowy day had to stop by to check out something in the building. It was closed for the day, but he went inside and he said down in the basement, he said it sounded, he heard all his voices and noises like people are moving furniture. And he said, oh, I'll give them a hand. So he went to the top of the stairs. There's no lights on in the basement. And he realized there were no other cars in the parking lot and no other footsteps in the snow. And he said, whatever's making that racket down there can stay. And yeah, he took off. So if you have ghost hunting equipment or you have a sixth sense, definitely go to this location. There's 14 acres of battlefield still in existence for you to test your abilities there. Okay, there's a building behind this mass here. I don't know if you can see, there's a window. This is an old brick building up in the town of Highland. Has anyone, well, probably many people, heard of Contadina tomato products? Mm-hmm. Excuse me. Contadina began in the town of Highland. If you've tried to grow tomatoes in this area, you can't give them away. Generally, you have so many. So all the tomatoes from the Hudson Valley area would be brought to this factory. There I am standing under a collapsed staircase there years ago. I was asked, okay, are you seeing that? I'm getting a software update from Apple. Hang on. Okay. Everything's jumping in. I was brought there by a town of Highland policeman who all these years later is actually now a lieutenant. And he grew up near here, and he said they would see a figure in the upstairs window. Well, the upstairs, the second floor is collapsed. There's no way to look through unless you have a big ladder. But he thought it would be a good idea to take a brick from the factory as a souvenir. He had this brick in the back seat. I think it was his patrol car. and he's driving across the Newburgh Beacon Bridge and looks in his rear view mirror, and there's a man sitting. Apparently the owner of this factory, Rosario Prizia, was killed in a boiler explosion early on. So bringing a brick from the factory, probably not the best idea. He stops his car in the middle of the Newburgh Beacon Bridge. Not the safest thing to do, but he thought this was the safer option, and he grabbed the brick and threw it into the river. So again, things not to do. Little side note, probably about 10 years ago, they leveled this factory and they put up a couple of homes. Uh-oh. I knew it was just a matter of time, and one day my phone rings and they said, yeah, we're in the town of Highland and it's a brand new house. And I'm like, here it comes. And we see this man and there's footsteps and what is going on? I said, do you by any chance, live on the site of the old tomato factory? Oh, you're so psychic. How did you know that? I said, no, just been there, done that. She had no idea that there was a previous haunting that they seem to have inherited. So even if it's a new house, it doesn't mean you're not putting it on haunted ground. This is a beautiful place and historic, the Gomez Mill House in Marlborough. Speaking of creepy paintings, this woman on the wall over here in the background, I've talked to, I don't know, half a dozen people who work there, and they swear her eyes follow you. But the really interesting thing is this rocking horse. One of the women, the volunteers, was cleaning upstairs where this is in a hallway, and she hears something and she looks out the doorway and this rocking chair is wildly rocking back and forth as if someone was riding it. The second she steps foot into the hallway, the horse stops like somebody slammed their hand on it, and she hears a little girl laughing. Well, in 1873, this horse, rocking horse, belonged to little 7-year-old Emily Armstrong. Her family lived there. She was playing in the mill pond in front of the house. Fortunately, she fell and hit her head on a rock and was killed, and she's buried right in front of the house. And this is her rocking chair. So a lot goes. I could spend half a day just talking about all the things that go on in the Gomez Mill House. So if you're looking for a good historic haunt for Halloween, definitely visit that. This looks just like my summer home. Oh wait, I don't have a summer home. This is the Columns Museum in Milford, Pennsylvania. And its claim to fame is this flag. When Lincoln was shot in Ford's Theater, the flag that was draped over the presidential box was bunched up and placed under his head. And these are Lincoln's bloodstains from the night he was shot. Now, nobody thinks nobody's claimed to have seen Lincoln there or felt Lincoln's presence. But there are several other things going on. Extremely, extremely haunted location. When Mike and I went there to investigate, he was given the code and the keys and talk about a night in a museum. We just let ourselves in and we had the whole museum to ourselves that night. And it's very dark in there, and one of the rooms, every time Mike went into it, he's like grabbing his neck, and I'm like, oh my God, I just feel terrible. I'm having trouble breathing, this pain, I feel awful. And he'd leave the room, and he'd feel fine, and this happened a couple of times. So finally, later on in the night, he said, let's get some lights on and see what's happening. Well, right behind where he was standing was this. There was a man by the name of Schultz who was very abusive. His wife left him. He tracked her down, shot her to death. and they caught him, and these were the leg and arm shackles that were on him when this noose was used to hang him in the county courthouse. And that's where every time Mike didn't realize he was standing right next to it. So other things not to bring into your home, nooses, execution devices, yes. I have to mention Museum Village. This again is kind of a Disneyland of hauntings. Smith here of Orange and Rockland Wealth had such a huge collection of objects. He would not have one inkwell, he would have 65. He would not have, you know, a plow or a lantern. He would have dozens of them. So he needed to build a whole village. You know, most of us have a curio cabinet. He built a village to house it all. In his carriage house, he has several of these. And this is one of the most haunted locations because, do you know what this is? That's an old hearse, yes. And people have pretty much run screaming from this building. One thing that has been seen is a shadow which goes up the side of the wall and over the ceiling above you. Rather disconcerting. Ghost hunting groups have actually run from this location. This is a little map I did of everywhere there's a red circle. There has been numerous accounts of haunted activity. So basically, throw a dart anywhere at Museum Village. And I have a lot of stories. I've written about this. But one of the most bizarre was in the old apothecary. Now, what R.J. Smith would do, not R.J., was it Mr. Smith would do, he would buy entire collections and then set it up. He bought this entire contents of this old drugstore and built the building for it. Now, a lot of people have felt very disoriented, kind of woozy in this building. And one woman was on, they sometimes give little ghost tours, and she's on this ghost tour. She had bought a new shirt for the occasion, and she's standing in the center of the room. There's a wood stove there. She said all of a sudden the room just started spinning. She felt herself falling over backwards, and a hand grabbed her shirt and pulled her upright, which is very nice. It saved her, but the shirt then had, the brand new shirt, then had this bizarre stain on it. If you were to put your thumb here and your fingers along here, it's exactly what would have happened. And of course, nobody saw anything. She didn't see what this was. And there was actually water on the floor where whatever this was standing. So, hold on. I'm sorry, I might have to move this too. But this is the actual shirt. You can see, you can probably see the stain on it right here. I will drape it over here if anybody would like to come and examine it. Someone at one of my last talks said I should offer a free book for whoever puts it on, but I wouldn't recommend putting it on. So if you go to Museum Village, they're probably having some ghost hunts, I would imagine, this month. Even not, you know, so many buildings to explore on your own. Last, and certainly not least, I sent this photo that I took to my friend Barbara, the psychic. She often works from photographs, and she doesn't actually need to physically see or touch the object. And I really felt like a rat doing this, but I sent her the photo. I said, do you sense anything from this? And I don't know, 10 minutes later I get this email. Oh, Linda, I'm so sorry. I can't get it. Every time I try to open this photo, I start choking. I just feel terrible. She goes, and and she thought it was a cobbler's bench, you know, an old shoemaker. She goes, I don't understand, you know, basically, oh, I've let you down, but I just keep choking. I'm physically choking every time I look at it. So I said, okay, let me tell you what this is. I was down in St. Augustine at the Ripley's Museum, and this is the room of execution devices. You might notice the beheading swords on the wall. This was something known as a garroting bench. The victim would sit here. See this rope? That would be put around his neck. A stick would be put in the rope behind the bench and twisted, and that's how the person would be executed. So again, things not to bring into your home. But yeah, some very bad vibes to these objects. So you know that commercial, what's in your wallet? Well, what have you brought into your home is essentially what this is. I hope I've showed you a wide variety, from clothing to furniture to, I could have included jewelry, of course the creepy dolls, the paintings, anything that a spirit in whatever distress it's in might attach itself to. So with that, I would be happy to answer any questions you might have. Yes?
First, I would like to comment on that painting. I don't get anything negative at all. I get desperation.
Desperation. Okay. No, that's, she's saying she gets desperation and please help me. I have gotten that as too. Yeah, there was clearly, he was in distress. Yes. Sure.
I've done all the things. I used to live in New Jersey before I moved here about 10 years ago. And we had a room that became our antique room. My husband was the gold collector. I collected jewelry, he collected guns, he collected daggers, he collected anything.
Weapons.
And I kept saying, put it in the antique room. I didn't want some of the things I would accept.
Right.
And we had to have our house exercised.
Oh, really?
It felt
Okay.
so bad that nobody could be in that room, and my husband would be very negative and say, I don't want you to ever go in that room.
No.
And we had a ghost school going around, and one became a spiritual guide. Years later, came back. It was very.
Did you end up getting rid of the object?
No.
No, you kept them, but you had an
Yeah, well,
exorcist.
eventually we moved and we had to get it.
Okay. In case you didn't hear that in the back, they had an antique room, and her husband collected guns and knives, and they had to have the house exorcised. So.
When
Yeah.
they came into my bedroom, I said, that's it.
Yes, once they come in the bedroom, they're out. Any other questions or yes?
Have you ever investigated the seclusion school that's on the property?
No, we were just talking about that. If anyone has any way for me to get in, any inside info to legally, and with permission of the county, absolutely have been hearing about that for, well, Gary's been in there and has had some experiences. The Salesian building, right over here. Any other questions? Or yes?
I have a question. I know you talk about people being frightened by spirits, ghosts, or whatever, but has anyone ever been injured by them?
Has anyone ever been injured? Very rarely, but yes. Mike was actually pushed down a tight spiral staircase, just caught himself before being seriously injured. Scratches mostly. I think the real harm is the psychological effect. I mean, this is your home. This is the one place you're supposed to go to feel safe. And people have had to move or have just been miserable. It happens, but it's rare with the physical, usually just pushes and things like that. But the mental anguish can be severe, for sure. There's a question over here.
Oh,
Yes.
I would remind people, like when you buy something from eBay, especially if it's a nice antique lamp, and you notice that it's been altered to electric, is sometimes it's a funeral urn. And that happened to me twice.
Oh, yeah, I don't know if you all heard that. She bought a lovely lamp on eBay that had been, an old one had been electrified. Turned out they were funeral urns.
Right. So they found a way to get rid of it by selling it on there. By the time I figured it out, I said, what's that funny smell? And so I rubbed my finger on the lamp, because it was beautiful. It was English, and it had to go back to like 1840. It had this beautiful fleur-de-lis lampshade on it, couldn't resist it. So I'm like, I rubbed my finger on it, I said, well, it smells like herbs, and I can't quite get that other smell I'm getting here. And yeah, that's what it was. It was.
Yeah. I was just down in Moundsville, West Virginia. Very haunted penitentiary there, but somebody has a paranormal museum. It's 2 rooms of things like embalming tables. They have the cap that was used and the electric chair to put on the prisoners before they were killed, as you know, to kill them. A whole host of creepy dolls. Just 2 rooms full of all of this type of stuff, and yeah, you just have to be very careful. It's not all malevolent and bad, but we all have enough problems without bringing other people's problems into our houses, I think.
Well, what I did was I took the lamp back and sold it at auction.
There you go. So somebody else got it now. There you go. The next foreign fire. Yes.
Have you ever been to Burnbury Mansion up in Glen's Bay? It's a big,
No,
it just reminded me
Burnbury Mansion.
of creepy dolls, because they have this closet full of creepy dolls.
Yeah, as I said, I think that's redundant terms. I think, but yeah, there are a lot of interesting.
I was going to say the U.S. cycling team for the Olympics uses that as a training.
Okay. In the back there, you had a question?
Have you ever heard of the brick house in Montgomery being haunted?
The brick house.
It's a historic home.
Oh yeah, I contacted them and they said, nope, nothing going on here. So I don't know if they were. I know that's not true, but yes, they wanted no part of an investigation at the time. But you know that things have changed. 20 years ago, some of these historic sites don't mention the G word, you know, where the ghost, they didn't want to hear it. And then several years after that, I, honest to God, had historical sites up and down the Hudson Valley calling me, could you come and find a ghost? Because, you know, it brings people in. They finally realize. And I'm like, I'm not guaranteeing I will find you a ghost. I'll be happy to come up and do some research and an investigation. And sometimes, you know, we found sometimes it was just legend. But no, I don't. But a lot of places, that's what pays the bills. Families will, you know, whole families will go where, you know, no pun intended, where kids normally wouldn't be caught dead. But you mention a ghost story, you get them in the door, then you can teach them about the history. So, anyway, yes. You have a question?
She's getting it.
Okay.
She's
okay. Sure.
I have been to a lot of historic mansions. Have you worked in Westchester County? Is a place like Lyndhurst haunted?
Yes, it is. Lyndhurst is just beautiful. We were there last year, I believe it was, and our guide was telling us all about the different hauntings there at Lyndhurst. And so he said, try writing the board a letter to see if they will have you come in and do an investigation. I never heard back for some reason. So yes, Lyndhurst is very haunted. Most of the major mansions, the Mills Mansion, Olana, if you're familiar with all of those up and down the Hudson, they have some very, very interesting stories. There was, years ago when I was working on a tour book of haunted sites, one of the mansions, which will remain nameless, I called up and said, do you have ghost stories? And they said, oh yes, we have all, I set up an appointment to go up there. And when I went up there, they're like, well, who are you? Well, I'm Linda Zimmerman. I have an appointment, at 10 o'clock or whatever it is to talk about the ghost stories. Who told you there were ghosts there? I want a name because that person's getting fired. Well, I was not going to rat out the person. I said, I'm sorry, it must have been a mistake. Wrong mansion. I must have the wrong mansion. So it's unfortunate. It's part of the what do you think the people who lived in the home did on cold winter nights? They told ghosts, they told legends, Washington Irving stories and ghost stories. It's part of our folklore. So to deny it, it's kind of silly, and you kind of shoot yourself in the foot. There's certainly ways to preserve the integrity of your history, but still have fun and tell some stories. So, yes?
I'm interested in the book, and just like the old movie Changeling, transference, a physical object moving from one place to another.
Right.
What else have you seen?
With that, the transference of objects, like the book we were talking about that ended up in the glove compartment. I have actually physically seen at places where there was something on the table at the start of the night, and then at the end of the night, what's it doing on the second floor? Landing. I have, I didn't see it move, but countless examples of objects, and I hear that a lot from homeowners. They know they put something there, and they make a point that this object is here, and they'll find it in the garage, or they'll, just crazy places, like what is it doing on the top of a cabinet in another room? So, in the place with the doll with the missing finger, they have actually seen things. There was, I believe it was a glass horse they saw come, nobody was near it, it came off of the table and smashed on the floor. In fact, in that same house, the man who brought home all the skulls, he thought it would be fun for Halloween to put one of the Native American skulls on the table near the back door with the candy in front of it, where the trick-or-treaters brave enough to come in and take the candy by the skull. And no one was in the kitchen. He turned his back for a minute and they hear smash. He had it on the skull on the table here. It smashed about 15 feet away in the corner. So the skull, the Native American skull. That should have been your first clue to remove things. Yes?
I have seen a candy fly from there to there.
Okay, so you've physically seen things
In front of me.
move.
It was one of those big
The big heavy candles.
blue.
Yep,
But that was through a meditation
okay.
that we were doing. And suddenly, whatever was there,
Didn't like it. Yeah, that's a good point. Things in your house that don't like when you're doing positive things, keep doing it. If you're praying, if you're meditating, if you're saging the house, if you're lighting candles, prayers, religious music, whatever it is, it may really irritate whatever it is at first, but you keep it up and it will go away. Lisa Ann had this great analogy. She said, say you have this obnoxious uncle who drinks too much at every single party. Well, the next party you throw, don't have any alcohol. He's going to be really upset. He'll come back to the next one. He goes, with enough time, you're not feeding that. He's not going to come anymore. So stay positive. Don't we were talking about this previously, don't antagonize things. Oh, I dare you to, yeah, don't do that. But just be positive and love and light and compassion. And one of the things I found I never expected was several years after I started investigations, people started contacting me, calling me up saying, you know, what did you do when you were here? The activity stopped. And I was just investigating. I don't do house clearings or exorcisms, you know, I'm an author. So what I think I figured out is a lot of these things are trying to get a message across. Like the woman had such a sad, lonely life, never having children or getting married. I told her story. Now everybody knows her story. And I think getting that message out, getting the point across that she's been trying to, you know, get out, I would say 30 to 40% at least of hauntings seem to stop or subside substantially, if we can figure it out. There are plenty of times you're not going to have any clue. There's no record on the location. You just don't know. But yeah. Oh, yes, in the backpack.
Yes. Does a person have to have, or does it help for them to have a predisposition to believe in such things for them to actually happen? It's sort of a spin-off of what you were saying already.
Right. Do they have to have a predisposition to experience a haunting? It helps, but some of my best witnesses are the staunchest skeptics. There was one house where all kinds of activity was going on, and the brother kept saying, it's absolute nonsense, it's absolute nonsense, till he heard footsteps coming in his room, slam his door. He literally ran out of the house, and I said, okay, explain. Well, I have no explanation, but obviously there's a rational explanation. I said, well, if it's so rational, why did you run out of the house? Oh, look at the time. I have to, you know. So it helps, but the skeptics who have experiences certainly are very credible witnesses.
Have you ever gone to the Vanderbilt Mansion?
The Vanderbilt Mansion, which one in Westchester?
The one in Hyde Park.
Hyde Park, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I've been to the Vanderbilt Mansion as well.
To investigate or just?
No, they didn't want an investigation either. There, yeah, yes. I remember one location I contacted, and I said the G word, and they told me that sullies the integrity of our institution. So I don't want to sully anyone's integrity.
I had a situation with this tool.
Okay.
I'm kind of a skeptic. What happened was I'm working on our house, and I don't know what I'm doing. I figured out the tools that I need, but I knew I needed a tool, but I didn't know what it was. And we have a large barn with the workshop in the back is probably 1,000 square feet. And my brother and I inherited the place from our parents. It's an old house, 1810, and the barn is probably 100 years old. So the barn, and my brother's a neatnik. He actually has a Roomba clean his workshop floor when he's not there. So,
do you hire him out?
So, and everything is very neatly put away, and it's got shelving that is like 6 feet apart, and stuff is placed on the shelf, not like you throw it up there. He's got things placed very carefully. And anything to do with mortaring is down in this bin. And I don't know what kind of tool this is, but I go out to the barn and I'm like, God, I need something. I don't know what tool it is. I need it. And it was, you know, last summer was kind of hot days, and I was like hot and tired, and I had to put away. You have to put everything away in his workshop, and I had to put away an electrical cord. So I go down one of the aisles of shelvings, and I'm trying to throw it up, and I'm tired and I'm hot, and it's like, for some reason it's way up there. So then I go around the shelving thing to this other aisleway, which is again about 6 feet wide, and I go to throw it up, and it just fell down. I said, I can't deal with it. I turn around, and in the middle of the aisle, now this is 6 feet, this is laying on the floor. And I thought, what the hell is that? Where's that coming from? And I didn't think anything of it, and I walked out of the workshop, and I closed the door, and I go, wait a minute, that would be perfect. And
Perfect
it's now
for
my
what
most
you're-
used tool.
Is that a scraper?
I think it's, well, I asked my brother what it was, he said it's something for grout,
Right,
so
so,
grout and tile in a bathroom.
yes, and that's what you needed.
Yeah, this
So-
thing here.
Yep, so I would say that was a little friendly help for you. That, I mean, I'm telling you, things like that happen, like the woman who was grabbed and held up. There was a case in Middletown where a woman was clearing her steps, she started falling over backwards, and she said, oh, this is it. She physically felt 2 hands on her back, I mean, she was over. There was no way, something pushed her back up. But hey, they were trying to be helpful, so let's take that as a positive sign. If other objects start appearing in your home, that might be a different story, but excellent. Yes?
Councilman Newport from Town of Goshen. If you want access to the Salesian building, it's owned by the taxpayers of the town and village of Goshen. So see me after the meeting. We can make arrangements for, I plan on taking it down very soon.
Oh, really?
But next to this beautiful building, we can't have it.
Okay,
So
okay.
See me after the meeting, we will make arrangements for you.
Yes, okay, meeting over, I need to talk to someone. Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments? Well, so you all gonna go home and look more closely? Oh, yes. Oh, that's a good thing. Okay, I'll take care. Bye-bye. Yes.
Did you ever do any investigations at Bannerman's Island?
Bannerman's Island, yes, been there, done that. That's been haunted since the Native American times. In fact, the Dutch, when there was some sort of hostilities, they would go to Bannerman's Island because they knew the Native Americans would follow them there. But yeah, they hear a horse galloping across the island, see figures. There is a whole host of strange
That was
things.
received well before Bannerman took control of the island, or bought the island.
Mhm. Well, a lot of activity took place afterwards as well. Caretakers who once all of that was moved out, I think they moved it to Long Island. There were caretakers on the island who just had so many different stories, going well into the 20th century. Haven't heard of anything recent, but I don't know that anybody lives on the island any longer.
It's pretty active. I mean, they do have, they have theater on the island now.
They have tours.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's manned pretty well.
Right.
Nobody lives there.
Okay. Yes, in the far back.
A question about time frame. Do these things get more intense based on the number of years from the original trauma or the original story that needs to be told? Versus, like I would ask you, what's the most contemporary haunting or situation? You know what I mean? Like,
No, that's an excellent question. I think if something's attached to the object or there's something in the building, once it happens, it can be exacerbated maybe by a time of year or emotional turmoil in the house might spark it, but I don't know that it increases with time. That one case with the book in the house, I think that increased only because 2 weeks later she didn't realize in 2 weeks she was going to have to move out. But for the most part, I think this activity is fairly consistent. There was a house where all the activity took place at harvest time, because that's when everybody was there, harvesting, and that's when a lot of the activity. Sometimes during the anniversary of the event, whether it was, a death or some sort of tragedy, then it might intensify a little there. But that's a good question. I'm trying to think of cases where it continually increases, and offhand, other than what I just mentioned, no. But that's something to pay attention to in the future. All right. Oh, one more question in the back. Yes.
What's more frightening? A Native American ghost or the Headless Horseman ghost? A better question maybe, has anybody seen the Headless Horseman ghost?
That's a good question. I have not known of anybody to see the Headless Horseman. That was a legend going back hundreds of years. Does anybody know? Did you know? I don't know of anybody who has actually seen it. I don't know of any accounts. I would say an irritated Native American ghost whose grave has been disturbed is far more concern to me, for sure. However, I say that now, but if a headless horseman came charging at me in the middle of the night, I might amend my statement for sure. But all of them can certainly be disturbing in their own inimitable style. All right, well, thank you all for coming, and happy